Okay, good day. So I am Chris Samuel Salcedo and I am here with Anju and Suiman. Together we are Group 4 and we will be discussing Reading 14, which is the dissertation of Justine Harmon entitled The Normative Architecture of Reality Towards an Object-Oriented Ethics. So Harmon focuses on post-humanist proto-ethics, which involves grappling with the metaphysical and cultural assumptions that shape our identities as modern humans. It aims to expose and challenge the myths defining what it means to be human, while illuminating modern technoscience's mythical nature. Harmon explores the interface between myth and philosophy, recognizing that philosophy is not identical to truth, but provides a space for accessing truth. It emphasizes the messy and multilateral nature of our world, where every entity takes its measure from the imperatives of other beings. So his dissertation seeks to develop alternative methods for understanding ethics, not through top-down conceptualizations, but from the ground up, acknowledging our entanglement with things and the diverse self-presentations of beings. The post in post-humanism signifies the late modern human condition of seriously engaging with the metaphysical and cultural assumptions that shape our identities. It does not mean leaving the human behind, but rather questioning and exposing the myths that define what it means to be human. Closing these myths, which circumscribe human identity, paradoxically opens up new possibilities for understanding and re-evaluating them. The post also refers to the exposure of the mythical nature of modern technoscience, highlighting the need to examine the reductive, demythologizing enterprise of science critically. In this sense, posthumanism involves both a departure from traditional conceptions of the human and a re-evaluation of the myths that have shaped our understanding of humanity. Harmon mentions Kierkegaard's description of the knight of fate, who can, to quote, fall down in such a way that at the same time it looks as though one were standing and walking, to transform the leap of life into a walk, absolutely to express the sublime in the pedestrian. This is used to illustrate the paradoxical nature of the posthumanist project in grappling with the metaphysical and cultural assumptions that shape our identities as modern humans. The call from Harmon about post-humanist proto-ethics is this dissertation is a work in post-humanist proto-ethics. However, like the case of postmodernism with respect to the modern, the post-human is not simply left the human behind. Rather, the post signifies the late modern human condition of coming to grapple in a serious way with the metaphysical and historical cultural assumptions in which our identities as modern humans are entangled. So, Harmon mentioned in the text that post-conscient philosophy has become a transparent cage that has lost touch with the absolute outside, the realm of existence that is indifferent to human perception and understanding. They advocate for recovery of speculative philosophy, which aims to go beyond the limitations of critical and linguistic turns in philosophy. They argue that in the face of ecological catastrophe and the increasing infiltration of technology into our lives, an anti-realist position is not equipped to address these challenges. They believe that a non-dogmatic and non-idealist conception of the absolute is needed, one that takes into account the progress achieved through critique but also acknowledges the limitations of human understanding. This recovery of speculative philosophy involves a rejection of dogmatism and an openness to exploring the depths and inscrutability of things that cannot be fully captured by either consciousness or practical handling. However, there is a disagreement among these thinkers regarding the nature of withdrawal and excess in objects. While some argue that there is a determinate nucleus in objects that remains forever withheld from any access or relation, others question this claim and suggest that there is always more to an object that can be encapsulated by human technological schemes. The engagement with speculative realism and posthumanism also involves a critique of technological discourse, which tends to view entities solely as resources for human consumption. Instead, Harmon proposed thinking of entities as objects that impose themselves and resist human appropriation. This metaphysical framework of speculative realism provides a direction for further inquiry into the nature of being and ethics, questioning the assumption that being is separate from or in contradiction to giveness or self-presentation. It suggests that being itself may have an inherent proto-ethicality that underlies and informs human ethical systems. In this view, to be is to self-present, and self-presentation involves a continuous series of directives that other beings respond to in varying degrees of adequacy and understanding. So the interface of myth and philosophy refers to the relationship between these two concepts. Myth is defined as a self-concealing background from which every explicit self-presentation, whether practical or theoretical, emerges. It represents the assumptions and historical context in which our identities as modern humans are entangled. On the other hand, philosophy is seen as a singular opening or space of access to truth. It is the pursuit of understanding and knowledge that goes beyond the surface level of myth. However, it is important to note that philosophy is not identical to truth. While philosophy can lead us toward the truth, it is not the ultimate truth itself. It is a continuous process of seeking and questioning, with multiple philosophies coexisting and contributing to our understanding of the world. So, Harmon's dissertation, Chapter 1, provides an introduction to Harmon and sets the stage for the subsequent chapters. It discusses the concept of the post-human and how it relates to the human condition in the late modern era. The chapter acknowledges the paradoxical nature of grappling with the metaphysical and cultural assumptions that shape our identities as modern humans. It also references Kierkegaard's concept of the knight of faith who is able to transform the leap of faith into a walk and express the sublime in the pedestrian. The chapter also explores the idea of the closure of myth in the post-humanist project. It suggests that by challenging the myths that define what it means to be human, the project actually opens up new possibilities for understanding the myth itself. Harmon aims to articulate the interface between myth and philosophy, where myth represents the background assumptions that shape our understanding, and philosophy points to a singular opening to truth. So in terms of structure, Harmon consists of three main chapters. Chapter 2 is abstract and historical, Chapter 3 is abstract and theoretical, and Chapter 4 is concrete and theoretical. Each chapter explores different aspects of the post-humanist project and its implications for ethics and philosophy. Okay, so Chapter 2 of the dissertation explores the historical development and consequences of the is-ought or fact-value distinction. The distinction, first formulated by David Hume, separates descriptive propositions from perspective propositions. Hume's formulation of this distinction drives a wedge between these two types of propositions, making it impossible to derive normative claims from purely descriptive ones. Harmon argues that this move away from the Platonist moral realism towards the is-ought distinction is a result of the historical process that began with the advent of modernity and the Cartesian metaphysical subject. Descartes, in his philosophy, posited the existence of a valuative substance, the subject, which provides meaning and value in a world of inherently meaningless material substances. Hume, building upon Descartes' ideas, softened the substantialism of Descartes' metaphysical dualism, paving the way for Kant's transcendental idealism. In Kant's philosophy, subjective interiority is expanded beyond the illuminated and fully knowable realm of the thinking subject to include the intelligible nominal domain of moral law. This shift towards subjective interiority and the emphasis on the moral law as an intelligible nominal domain can be seen as a consequence of the Cartesian metaphysical subject and the advent of modernity. Harmon argues for a flat or egalitarian ontology in Chapter 3, where every object, from specific geographical locations to individual human beings, stand on the same metaphysical footing as a source of normative directives. Drawing on various philosophical accounts such as Plato's Cora, Duns Scotus' Originary Univocity, and Deleuze and Guattari's Plane of Consistency, Harmon argues that to exist means to be different and to make a difference. This mutual conditionality between objects is referred to as inter-object sphere, where the being of beings does its work. Harmon also draws on Heidegger's work on the thing to emphasize that being itself is not being, but rather the ongoing self-presentation of determinate things. Harmon critiques Sartrean existentialism for reducing the existential problem to a conflict between subjectivism and objectivism, without recognizing that the birth of the metaphysical object was also the birth of the metaphysical subject. Both subjectivism and objectivism belong to the same source of Cartesian ontology, where the relation between subjectivity and objectivity is dictated unilaterally by subjectivity. Harmon argues that the object-oriented ethics is not just an objectivist ethics, but rather a strategy to recover the ethical prior to its ossification in the ideal domain of values and subjective privilege. Harmon aims to provide a more rigorous and nuanced understanding of the normative question, exploring the origins of norms and the ethical relation. It argues for a realist view that contrasts with theological absolutism, emphasizing the importance of recognizing the normative demands of concrete and singular beings. The absence of a transcendental, universal measure does not imply that everything is permitted, but rather that the normative exercises itself in the self-presentation of individual beings. Harmon then introduces Heidegger's perspective on objects, stating that we uncover the being of objects phenomenologically by examining our everyday dealings in the world. Heidegger argues that objects are not objects for theoretical knowledge, but rather entities that we use and produce in our everyday lives. These entities, referred to as equipment or tools, are encouraged as ready to hand and withdraw from self-conscious reflection. When we engage with tools, we tend to focus on the task at hand and the end result, rather than disinterestedly looking at the tool itself. Harmon emphasizes the importance of considering objects as they present themselves amidst our everyday coping in order to understand our being in the structure of our care. So Harmon then discusses Harmon's book on Melasou philosophy, where Harmon articulates the sense of withdrawal in terms of inexhaustibility. Harmon suggests that both phenomena in consciousness and practical handling of entities fail to do justice to the full depth of things. However, Harmon takes issue with Harmon's conclusion that there is a determined nucleus in objects that remains forever withheld from any access or relation. They argue that while objects may have an overwhelming plenitude, it does not mean that there is a specific essence that is forever inaccessible. Harmon then introduces Harmon's object-oriented philosophy, or OOO, as a subfield of speculative realism. OOO argues that individual entities of various scales are the ultimate stuff of the cosmos and cannot be reduced to anything else. Harmon proposes that philosophy should address the objects on their own terms. Harmon then explains Harmon's distinction between undermining and overmining objects. Undermining occurs when objects are claimed to be unreal because they are derivable from something deeper, while overmining occurs when objects are declared to be unreal because they are useless fictions compared to other aspects of them. Harmon suggests that Harmon's approach does not fulfill a hazardous promise of returning to the things themselves and fails to provide a robust theory of metaphysical realism. Harmon acknowledges that the lack of potency in thinking through difficult practical matters is not limited to object-oriented philosophy, but extends to the current state of speculative realism as well. They mention Strick's argument that realist ontology lacks grounds for ethical and political action, potentially leading to a political quietism. Harmon also raises concerns about the idea that all real objects are withdrawn from any possible relation, which they describe as a vacuous actuality. Harmon concludes by mentioning their own thinking about objects, which began prior to their encounter with speculative realism and object-oriented philosophy. They mention their master's thesis on the intersection of art and place in late Heidegger, where their theoretical orientation towards objects took shape. They propose a different understanding of objectival access that does not rely on excessive essence and aim to develop their own argument in line with this perspective.
Understanding objects involves examining how involvement with the world. This approach This approach is influenced by the ideas of philosopher Martin Heidegger. Heidegger suggests that we can uncover the being of objects within the world by phenomenologically examining our everyday dealings with them. He argues that objects are not simply objects for theoretical knowledge, but rather they are what we use and produce in our everyday lives. Heidegger refers to these objects as equipments or tools. When we encounter tools in our everyday activities, they become transparent to us. We don't disinterestedly look at them, but rather we focus on the task at hand and the end result we want to achieve. We navigate a hermeneutic circle where the understanding of the tool depends on our understanding of other objects and their assignments. So objects that are ready to hand or in use are defined by their use. Their use is understandable within a referential nexus of other objects and their assignments. On the other hand, objects can also be encountered as present at hand, where we can stare at them and analyze them. However, in order to do so, we need to penetrate beyond their readiness to hand and engage in a different mode of comportment. Heidegger analysis suggests that objects, when they malfunction or break, become present at hand in a different sense. They resist our use and understanding, and they refer back to the world of use. This withdrawal from appropriation reveals that an exhaustible nature of objects, which cannot be fully grasped through practical or theoretical comportments. Overall, the phenomenological approach to objects emphasizes the importance of understanding objects in the context of our everyday coping and involvement with the world. It highlights the interplay between objects, their use, and our understanding of them. So this passage discusses the concept of withdrawal and its relation to objects and entities. It begins by stating that objects can be seen as broken and withdrawn from human understanding. This withdrawal is described as the object's indifferent withdrawal from human presence and consciousness. Harmon takes issue with the idea that there is a determinate nucleus in an object that remains forever, withheld from any access or relation. The passage then introduces the philosopher Graham Harmon in his philosophy of object-oriented ontology, or the OOO. So OOO is described as a subfield of a speculative realism, which is a strategy to combat correlations, the belief that knowledge is limited to the correlation between the human mind and the world. Harman then argues that individual entities of various scales are the ultimate stuff of the cosmos and cannot be reduced to anything else. He distinguishes between two ways in which post-Kantian philosophy tends to reduce objects: undermining and overmining. So undermining occurs when objects are claimed to be unreal because they are derived from something deeper, while overmining occurs when objects are declared to be unreal because they are useless fictions compared to what is truly evident in them. The passage also mentions the idea of the transparent cage of post-Kantian philosophy, which treats the object as a lens through which the world is seen. The thinkers discussed in the passage argue that this approach is not equipped to face the challenges of ecological catastrophe and technological infiltration. They advocate for the recovery of speculative philosophy, which aims at something beyond the critical and linguistic terms, while also taking into account the progress achieved through critique. This involves a non-dogmatic and non-idealist conception of the absolute. Overall, the passage explores the concepts of withdrawal, object-oriented ontology, and the need for a speculative approach to philosophy. Harmon's system of flat ontology is a philosophical system that posits every object as an irreducible, unified whole that is ultimately a constellation of four elements: the real objects, real properties, sensual object, and sensual properties. So the real object is the object as it exists in itself, independent of any relation to other objects. Real properties are the qualities or attributes that belong to the real objects. So these properties are withdrawn from all access and are never exhausted with the feeble sketches of them delivered to our hearts and minds. The sensual object, on the other hand, is the object as it appears to other objects. Sensual properties are the qualities or attributes that belong to the sensual object. Um, these properties are the products of interaction between objects and are necessary for the object to exist. Harmon distinguishes between real and sensual objects and properties. While real objects never interact, their sensual counterparts are at the bottom, nothing but the products of interaction. The sensual realm of experience is where all causation is triggered because contact in the realm of the real is utterly impossible. Harmon's flat ontology is a flat ontology because it does not privilege any particular level of being or any particular kind of entity. Instead, it treats all entities as equally real and equally important. Harmon's system draws on Husserl's phenomenology, which emphasizes the importance of perception and intuition and understanding the world. For Harmon, every phenomenon, even if necessarily taken up adumbratively, is perceived as unified whole. Appropriating Husserl for his argument, Harmon observes that every phenomenon, even if necessarily taken up adumbratively, is perceived as a unified whole. I do not first hear the vague crunching noise of stairs ascending and loosely connected series of unintelligible sound, but instead, as my wife coming home from work. Overall, Harman's system challenges traditional notions of what it means to be human by emphasizing the importance of objects and their relations to each other. It is a system that posits that every object is an irreducible, unified whole that is ultimately a constellation of four elements: the real objects, real properties, the central objects, and central properties. So the central object refers to the perceived whole entity that we experience through our senses. It is the unified whole that we perceive when encountering a phenomenon. For example, when we see a building, we do not perceive it as separate sides, but as a manifestation of the building itself. The properties by which we perceive the central object as a whole are called central properties. These properties are the various characteristics or qualities that we use to understand and make sense of the objects. For instance, when we hear the sound of tires on a driveway, we may perceive it as our spouse coming home from work based on the specific qualities of the sound. Harmon argues that not all properties are equally essential to the intelligibility of an object. To determine the essential properties, Harmon suggests engaging in eidetic variation, a process borrowed from Husserl. This involves imaginatively subtracting properties from a phenomenon until reaching the essential qualities that cannot be eliminated without compromising the integrity of the object. These essential properties are what Harman considers the real properties of an object. It is important to note the perception of sensual objects and their properties is limited to our sensory experience. We can only access these properties through sensual intuition and not through intellectual understanding. Harman disagrees with Husserl's distinction between sensual and intellectual properties, arguing that both forms of intuitions are valid but do not provide direct access to the essence of an object. Instead, the essence of an object can only be approached indirectly through allusion in the arts or sciences. So Harman argues that real properties, although constitutive of the being of an object, are forever concealed from both intellection and sensation. They are hidden behind the superficial appearances through which the object is accessible for experience. The real object, in Harman's view, is a unified and autonomous whole veiled in a private vacuum. It cannot be reduced to its own pieces or its outward relations with other things. Harman's concept of essence is not a timeless nature that each thing possesses from the beginning of the world. Instead, essence is the tension between a real object and its real properties in a single instant. This ontological withdrawal is central to Harmon's object-oriented position. However, Harmon's system doesn't fulfill Hassel's promise of returning to the things themselves. While Harmon offers a robust theory of metaphysical realism, he fails to provide access to the real objects and their properties. These objects remain withdrawn from any possible relations, both at the level of the whole and its parts, and at the level of the object and other objects outside of it. In contrast to Harmon's view, Harmon of the text argues that reality itself is phenomenal all the way down. They conceive of real objects as excessively material and inexhaustible plenums of demands that dictate the terms of an overwhelming number of relations. Real objects are not entirely non-relational, but every relation in which they find themselves is undetermined and undermining. So chapter 4 of the dissertation delves into a concrete and theoretical exploration of the subject matter. It builds upon the abstract and historical discussion in chapter 2 and the abstract and theoretical discussion in chapter 3. One important aspect discussed in this chapter is the concept of time and its role in understanding objects. Harmon refers to a more detailed overview of this reading in chapter 3, suggesting that understanding time is crucial in comprehending the nature of objects. By examining our everyday dealings with objects and how they present themselves amidst our concerned involvement, Harmon aims to uncover the being of objects within the world phenomenologically. This approach aligns with the ideas of philosophers like Heidegger, who emphasizes the importance of considering objects as they present themselves in our everyday coping. Furthermore, Harmon highlights the notion of interpretation in this chapter. Genuine interpretation, according to Harmon, aims to uncover the as of the object's own ongoing self-presentation. It is not about appropriating the other, but rather being appropriated by the other. To support this perspective, Harmon draws upon the hermeneutic theory of Luigi Parison, who emphasizes the object as an inexhaustible source of cues or directives that condition how the interpreter should respond to it or take it up. Overall, chapter 4 provides a concrete and theoretical exploration of objects, considering the relationship with time, the importance of phenomenological examination, and the role of interpretation in understanding their being. So we successfully explored post-humanist, pro-ethics, and the engaged with myth and philosophy. Overall, Harmon presents a complex and nuanced exploration of post-humanist pro-ethics, the engagement with myth and philosophy, and the need for alternative methods of understanding the world. It acknowledges critics of post-Kantian philosophy and highlights the importance of addressing ecological concerns and technological advancements. By adopting an object-oriented approach to interpretation, we can overcome the limitation of subjectivism and relativism. This approach allows us to see interpretation as a process of revealing the object's true nature rather than imposing our own subjective views on it. This object-oriented approach to interpretation has important implications for understanding moral and aesthetic issues. It allows us to see these issues as arising from the demands that objects make on us, rather than from our own subjective preferences. By recognizing the role of objects in interpretation, we can develop a more responsible, respectful way of relating to the world around us. So once again, this has been Juna Suiman and Chris Samuel Salcedo, and thank you for listening.